Some important context. This episode is recorded January 13th after the Renee Good shooting, but before the Alex Preddy shooting. Because we are in hell. All right. I'm with Michael Shermer, everybody. Welcome back to Walk-Ins. Welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Bridget.
How are
Been
you
a
doing
while.
these days? I know it has been a while. What have you been up to?
Well, living the dream here in Santa Barbara, riding my bike and writing my books and doing the podcast and publishing the magazine. I've been doing that since 1992. So still my day job.
Okay. Yep. And how's the magazine Skeptic going?
Pretty well. We've made the transition from print only in bookstores, which was old school, and now pretty much every issue more slide over to the digital versions and fewer print in bookstores. So, we're hanging in there. Here's just to remind you what it looks like. There's a recent issue on race. Yeah, it's a tough business. I mean, there's not a lot of advertising dollars to be chased. Those are now all online. And but I'm a baby boomer. I still like print magazines and newspapers and books and so on. So we're going to keep printing the magazine as long as we can.
I'm going to subscribe. It's funny. A couple of my friends have started magazines in the past couple of years. So my friend Max Meyer here, he started, why am I blanking? Oh my God. Arena. I'm just like, my brain is not working. He started Arena magazine, and it's kind of a blatantly kind of pro-American propaganda. He was saying we need some like more pro-America stories and pro-tech stories and innovation and being on board, like exciting stories about what's happening in that world. And then Alana Newhouse started Tablet magazine. So she started the magazine version of Tablet, and that comes every month. Arena's every 2 months.
Those are print magazines?
Print magazines that were launched in the past year. So, and then I believe the Blaze started one, Frontier, that I've only seen the first one. I haven't seen any more. I think it's still going. I work for Spectator magazine, and they started going from monthly to twice a month now. So that has increased, actually. They've been increasing their print. So, long way of me saying, I believe people are going back to print.
That's good. Yeah, because for a while, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, they were saying eventually the physical books would die, no more of the, just hardcover stuff. But that didn't happen. I mean, I think we've hit less than 50-50 on Amazon digital versus, ebooks and digital and audio versus print. But the print's still hanging in there. I think the curve flattened. So I do think there's a market for it.
Yeah, I don't know that young people are necessarily reading books. It seems like a lot of them are doing audio. I still prefer book to screen or tablet or even audio. Although some audio I can do now. If it's like a motivational kind of self-help book, then I can do audio. I actually want that in my ear. I listened to whose book was it that I listened to, and it was in his voice. He's the music. Wow, my brain is not working today. The music guy. Rick Rubin.
Oh, right. Okay.
He had a book that was all just like about art, and that was a great book to listen to because it was more of like a meditation. But if it's a book that I have to pay attention to, like yours, like Truth, then I have a hard time listening to it.
Yeah, I just got the audio edition of this book. For this guy's coming on my podcast, Why I'm Not an Atheist. But look at this thing. I thought, oh my God, where am I going to find the time to read this whole thing? Well, they sent me the audio version, so I've been listening to it on bike rides and car drives and vacuuming the house and chores and stuff like that. Yeah, audio is a great substitute when for just filling in empty time. I find
I get so distracted though by the visual. I'll be distracted and then I'll have to rewind, and I don't want to miss anything. Who wrote that book? The Why I'm Not an Atheist?
This is Christopher Beha. He was formerly the editor of Harper's Magazine. Speaking of magazines, and but so far, I mean, he's not a professional philosopher or theologian or anything like that, but he's pretty deeply read. So I'm pretty impressed with it so far. Um, yeah, I still try to read actual books, but it's harder. And I noticed a lot of my colleagues, professional scholars, scientists, and so on, they don't read books like they used to. And I think
Mhm.
it's because there's so much competition for content online. Here's an observation for you. So for 18 years, I wrote that monthly column in Scientific American. So once a month, I'm cranking out an essay on some controversial subject. And, the letters to the editor and this sort of thing would go on for weeks. And now when I publish something, on Skeptic or Quillette or Free Press or whatever, the half life of the exchange and commentary on it is like a couple hours, and that's it. It's gone.
Yep.
People are off to something else, and it's like, wow. I feel like a slacker if I'm only doing something like once a week.
Yep. We do Dumpster Fire, our kind of satirical new making fun of the dumpster fire of the news, and that has, that shelf life is so short.
Mm,
It's just like maybe, and we're not really even in the news cycle because I don't have the production team and ability to be as in the news cycle as, say, these people who kind of go every single day. And it is wild how fast you'll see something kind of
mhm,
cycle out of the news. I don't know if you saw the Axios did the kind of biggest trends for 2025, the news trends, and you could see the
mm.
bump and how long something would be in the news and searched, and then it would be out of the news cycle. And that was pretty eye opening as
How
well, just
long?
to see.
What was the curve? How long?
It just, I mean, the biggest things were things that none of us talk about. It was
Mm.
Labubu, it was K-pop Demon Hunter. These are the biggest,
Oh my god!
longest things that
What?
trended. I
Oh
know,
my
in case you
god!
wanna take your own life. And then, Sydney Sweeney was kind of
Oh yeah, of
stably
course.
in the news cycle all year, and you see that reflected even in the videos we did about Sydney Sweeney. Those did the best, and it wasn't
Mm.
because they were better videos, it's because they had a longer shelf life, and she was just trending more regularly last
That's
year. It
right. I
really
saw
is that
you wrote
much.
something about that. Didn't you write something
I
like
did.
boobs are back or something like that?
Yeah, that was like 2 years ago, and,
Amazing.
or that was a while ago actually too, but that went viral then.
Mhm.
And it is interesting just when they do these studies on our attention span, and I think this gets a lot to your current book, Truth.
Mhm.
The problems with trying to evaluate truth is that we have no attention span. So
Mhm.
aside from all of the other competing things that you mentioned, even on the back of your book, just the many ways, and then, like I say, and now AI has entered the chat, the many ways that we have a hard time, misinformation, disinformation, AI, how do you even crumbling institutions, how do you evaluate what's real, what's not real, what's true, what's not true? You also have a population that has an attention span of like 30. I mean, truly, when you learn about YouTube videos or anything, the professionals will tell you that you have less than 3 seconds to grab your audience before they go, and move on.
Mm.
3 seconds.
Oh my god, that's crazy. Yeah, and these, AI generated, photos and videos are so good.
Yeah, they're
I
so
just
good, and
think,
they're only gonna get better.
in terms of like one of my areas of UFOs and UAPs and all that stuff, it's like those days are gone where you can look at a photo and go, that's obviously fake, that's a hubcap thrown in the air or something like that. I mean, that now they're just so good. So I've been asking AI people, is there a way to like put in the digital file like a watermark or sort of digital fingerprint, something that shows somebody could look it up and go, oh, that one's fake. Such that somebody couldn't produce a video of Putin saying, we're going to launch the missiles in an hour, and then Trump goes, oh my God, we better counter. Somebody would go, hang on, let's look and see if this is real.
I think that I read something recently about this, and they said it's actually going to be easier to determine to put watermark things that are true
Hmm.
than not true.
Oh,
And
really? Oh.
this also because the amount of content that's going to be AI generated it's such a fire hose of content, and it's only going to get worse, and this goes to kind of the dead internet theory as well.
Mm.
You won't be able you will have your baseline assumption will have to be that everything is fake.
Yeah, you're gonna default to fake rather than default to truth, as the theory has it.
But
Yeah.
this should be your lane, Michael. Like, we are
Oh, I
kind
know.
of
Yeah.
this is if everything is if you have to I mean, you should anyway, but you kind of have to adopt the mindset of the skeptic completely in order to survive
I'll show you.
this.
Let me show you a funny photograph. So this was in late September. Steven Pinker was in town on his book tour. So he
Uh-huh.
and I did an onstage in conversation in LA. So
Mhm.
somebody took that photo in the audience and they put it into Grok and said, "Make them dance." So here we go.
Oh, I did see this, I think. Oh, that's crazy. That is crazy.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, now of course there's thousands of these online, but it's like, what? But that never happened. Yeah.
Yep. So how does your book Truth fit into this moment, and
Well, so yeah,
how does
yeah.
one survive truly? I don't know how because I see everyone basically losing their mind all
Mhm.
around me everywhere.
And it
And
doesn't even have to. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I'm just not sure how one maintains sanity in this kind of media ecosystem and world where you have no idea what is true and not true.
Yeah. So, the book argues that there is a way to determine truth with a small t, that is, a provisional truth, something confirmed to such an extent it would be reasonable to offer our provisional assent. That is, provisional as in, for now, this is what I think it probably is, but I'm willing to change my mind. Sort of a Bayesian reasoning type thing, assign a probability between 1% and 99% of something being true. Never 0% or 100%, just in case, because we're fallible. We're not omniscient deities. So, but it doesn't even have to be an AI generated video like the one I just showed you. It could be like the different videos of the ICE shooting in Minneapolis,
Mhm.
which, as you've seen, here's the leftist version, here's the right version, here's the CNN version, and here's the Fox News version. They're showing the same videos, and this was just striking to see this. You can clearly see right here she intended to run him over. The other one, you can clearly see right here she's trying to get away from him, and he's trying to shoot her, and so on. It's like, but we're all looking at the same video. So in
Yeah.
that case, you really have to sample different sources. You can't just rely on, I don't know, CBS News or something like Walter Cronkite. Here's the truth. Those days are long gone. Mainstream media is probably pretty much over now. Independent journalists and so on are the way to go. But which ones? And you can't trust any of them by themselves. So you have to really sample. This takes time. Half a dozen
No one
different
has time for this,
sources.
though. We
Yeah, I
started
know.
this conversation talking about attention span.
I
So
know. I know. So most of like I talk about in the book about research on what we say we believe and what we actually know about it. So this is sort of the explanatory illusion. So these are studies like you ask people, these are mostly college students, do you accept the theory of Darwin's theory of evolution? Oh yeah, of course. Almost everybody says yeah. All right, explain it. Well, you see, the giraffe stretches its neck and the babies have longer necks. No, that's not how it works at all. Or what's your position on NAFTA? North American Free Trade Agreement. I'm for it or I'm against it. What is it and who's in it? I'm not sure. You know, so in other
right.
words, when people say something publicly, this is what I believe. They probably mostly don't really know much about it. They're just signaling, I pretty much trust the scientists or the CDC, or I don't trust the government. I don't trust the CDC, regardless of the details of the particular claim. So we offload our beliefs about what is true to other people, to authorities, to organizations, and so on. That used to work pretty well until, I mean, it really collapsed with COVID and, the
Mhm.
whole, masks work, they don't work, you should wear them, you shouldn't wear them, the vaccines are going to prevent the spread. No, they won't prevent the spread. They'll, decrease the symptom. Well, they won't decrease the symptom, but they'll do, and so on. So all that conflicting information from the authorities, you
Racism
know,
is the real virus.
yes, yes, right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then worse, the policies decisions, closing all the schools, closing restaurants. Here in Santa Barbara, closing the beaches. I just could
Yeah.
not believe it. Closing parks,
Yeah.
outdoors with sunshine and fresh air, and stay inside where it's stuffy and come on, really, just terrible.
Yeah.
So I think people have lost a lot of trust, and universities used to be reliable sources of valid information, and now because they've gone so woke, and they've been wrong about so many things, the average person goes, why should I believe anything that comes out of Harvard? Look, they don't even know what a woman is.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. uh, you know
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, to pick a crazy example, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's a problem.
Guys, getting older sucks. That's why it's so important to take care of yourself and pay attention to your health. This is something a lot of men ignore, and it is so important. If you hate going to the doctor and dealing with the hassle, we've got the perfect solution for you. With Quest Health's line of tests for men, you can order a multitude of men's health panel tests that keep you informed about your health. You can check your testosterone levels, get a prostate screening, a colorectal screening, or take their comprehensive men's health profile test for a more complete picture of your health and wellness. Purchase lab tests online, visit a nearby Quest Diagnostics location for a sample collection, no doctor's visit required, or get immediate results at home with at-home test kits. Your results are delivered online, quickly, and discreetly. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code WALK-INS25 to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code WALK-INS25 for 25% off. Link in the description below.
A lot of the things I was thinking about reading your book and preparing to talk to you, I kept saying trust and I kept thinking about truth. Talk to me about how trust and truth are related.
Well, in this case, because we offload most of our beliefs to other authorities and organizations, you have to trust them, and if you don't, then you don't know what to believe. So that's pretty obvious from what we just went through
Mhm.
there. And I mentioned earlier this, default to truth. This is actual theory, cognitive psych theory, that are humans naturally gullible and will just believe anything, or are we naturally skeptical and it takes a lot to convince us to, I don't know, join a cult, or hand your money over to some Nigerian prince, that kind of thing. And the research on this used to say that we're pretty gullible. We just default to truth. We just believe whatever anybody tells us. But more recent research shows that that's really not the case. What we don't have in a lot of these examples is the base rate. So this is called base rate neglect. That is, I'll just use several examples. People that join Scientology and turn over, get a second mortgage and give the money to the church or something. Okay, that has happened. We have lots of examples, and but how many people went to the Scientology church, or took the little personality test, or they did the little cans on Hollywood Boulevard there where they set up, I don't know, Sunset, yeah, Hollywood Boulevard, and they just laugh it off and walk away. They don't join the cult, they don't turn over their savings. Or that Netflix documentary, the Tinder swindler, about how these women in their mid to late 30s got swindled by this guy that promised love and romance and family and children and the whole thing, and he appeared to have a lot of money, and they actually went on dates with him for months on the private plane to this 5-star resort, and this went on and on, like 10,000 texts and so on. And then, but they found 4 women, if I recall what it was, who actually turned over, like tens of thousands of dollars to him. The way it worked was, he kind of lured them in, like, we're going to get married, we're going to have kids, it's going to be great. 10,000 texts of love bombing, and then, but he's an international man of mystery and business, and so he has to go off to Switzerland some weekend, and then, like, on a Saturday, he says, "Oh, darling, honey, I'm about to close this $100 million deal on Monday morning, but the banks don't open until then, and I have to wire these guys $50,000. There's the moment, right?" So, of course, these women did this, and that's why they're in the movie. But what we don't know is how many women did this guy try this on?
I mean,
My
you
guess is
literally just described the plot of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
yes, yes, that's right. Yes, right, exactly. So how many women just told him to go fuck off after, when he asked for the money, or
Right.
he never even got that far.
Mhm.
They caught on to him. So we don't know that, right? So I tend to think, I mean, most people that are like the Nexium cult, how many women have joined groups that promise empowerment of women in business? Probably hundreds of thousands have probably done these seminars. How many of them, get the initials of the leader, branded into their crotch? Almost none, right?
Mhm.
0.0001%. I mean, there's a handful of them. You can name them. They're interviewed online and documentaries, but what we don't know is how many just walked away, or how many took the seminar and never got into the inner circle and all that stuff. So probably most people are pretty skeptical. They're not that gullible. It takes a lot. And the cult leaders, or the Keith Rainiers and the L. Ron Hubbards, they've really developed a skill, or a technique like this. These are the steps I got to go through to get to this thing where I want that, the ask, where I get the money, or whatever, the sex, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So I think for the most part, there is a reality. We can know something about it, and we call that truth. Most of the time, it works pretty well. We're not living in a post-truth world where it's all fake news. Despite the left's insistence on postmodernism and everybody's truth is their own truth and they're all equal, that's not correct. Or on the right, everything is fake news. You can't believe anything. Obviously, that can't be the case. Then what? How do we know anything that happened, right? So there has to
Yeah.
be something in the middle.
Yeah, I've been thinking so much about this for a number of reasons. One is how much of truth becomes, I mean, this kind of goes to like the woo girls create your own reality thing, but how much of what you believe is true becomes reality? So I
Hmm.
saw a tweet kind of going around about the shooting in Minneapolis. And it was like, wow, I can't believe it was very sarcastic kind of, wow, I can't believe that woman believed that these were fascist thugs who were going to kill her. I guess she needed to be killed by these fascist thugs to be proven wrong, or something along those lines. Essentially, reverse engineering kind of a conclusion and working back from there. But if you believe this, you go out and antagonize these people. Now they're talking
Hmm.
about the left wing people need to show up with guns and start shooting them. And now, if you have people standing off with these officers and in federal law enforcement agents who are doing a job or trying to, and you believe that these are fascist thugs, and now and then it ends up in martial law because you have people on both sides with guns shooting at each other. Doesn't that confirm your
Hmm.
belief about what you
Hmm.
thought was true? So, and yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, does it become a self-fulfilling, does truth or what you believe
Absolutely.
to be
Yeah.
true become a self-fulfilling
That
prophecy?
that's why it matters what's actually true, not just what people think is true, because people act on their beliefs. So I opened truth with a scenario on January 6th, where the people there, well, at least some of them, really believed that the election was being stolen, and that we're going to march down there and we're going to do something about it, and so on. So my scenario was: imagine you're at work and you get a call from your neighbor going, there's something odd about going on at your house. There's some people walking around. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, I think they might be trying to break in. So you call 911. They send the squad car. They don't see anything. Neighbor calls back. Now they're pulled up a truck, and they're like emptying the truck, and they're gonna, looks like they're trying to take your stuff. Oh my god, the police won't do anything about it. I'm going to go over there myself, right? That's not crazy. And so,
Right.
if you really believe what Trump said, they're stealing the election, you're stealing our country, and so on. Not everybody believed it, but some did. And there's some who went to prison, that even after prison there was uh, that documentary film that interviewed them. Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra Pelosi, is a filmmaker. So she interviewed these guys at home after they got out of prison, and they still believed, yeah, I think, I did the right thing. The election was stolen. Okay, that's the power of
Mhm.
belief. Or in this case, yeah, if you really believe ICE agents are Nazis, then here's the scenario. If you could go back in time and kill Hitler before he killed 6 million Jews and 30, 40 million other people in the wars, would you do it? Almost everybody goes, well,
Mhm.
yeah, of course. That would be the moral and right thing to do. So, okay, instead of Hitler, it's Trump or it's JD Vance or it's whoever, whoever your target is that you hate. That's the danger of putting those narratives out there. I mean, Tom Holman was saying this the other day. So it really comes down to the question of okay, so here's like political truths versus scientific truths. Clearly, a lot of people don't think ICE has any business enforcing immigration laws. Well, that should be something courts can decide. Apparently, they do.
Mhm.
And so, the right thing to do would be, say, for the state of Minnesota or the city of Minneapolis to sue the Trump administration or sue ICE and say, this is what you're doing here is unconstitutional or illegal or whatever. And apparently that is now happening. Okay, fine. That's the way to resolve these things. I mean, what's the truth about immigration? What's the right number? Well, there is no right number. It's, it just depends on what the country's goals are and so on. But the idea that, some mom's going to be out there screaming at this, officer in his face, like, what's he going to do? What's he supposed to do? Like go to his boss and go, I met this woman today, boss, and I've been rethinking what we're doing out here. Maybe we shouldn't be here. You're
Mhm.
fired. I mean, you've been hired to do this job. This is not your job to decide what's the right policy about immigration. And
Yeah,
that's
and
that.
I think a lot about being as someone who has a child, what it would take for me to put my own life in danger, whether or not she believed her life was in it's like I don't understand how many competing this is the interesting thing about all of our beliefs. There if you believe that you're in Nazi Germany, these are fascist thugs, then you should know that you are going to be in danger confronting them. That should be also part of your default. It should be like they know in Iran right now. I'm going to go out there and protest this regime, and there's a high probability that I'm going to lose my life doing that.
Mhm.
Now, they know that they're in an autocracy, theocracy, they're under dictatorship. They know this, and they also know the risk involved in protesting this. Now, the weird thing about the stuff in Minneapolis is she either didn't know this or did actually believe this, but in order to take your own life at it risk your own life with a child, a 6-year-old child, I was like, the only thing that makes sense to me is that you either are radicalized, you're in a cult, you're radicalized, and you truly believe this, or I mean, there really is no or. You're
There
just
is no or no.
or you or well, the or is that you don't think you're actually in danger. You, on some fundamental level, just really don't believe that that would actually happen to you. It could be some combination of both of those
Yes. Okay,
things.
that's a good point. Yeah, because in fact, this rarely happens, right? I mean, there's thousands of incidences where these activists are screaming in the ICE agent's face and nothing happens. So
I
these
mean,
are.
this has been kind of mainstream, not only just screaming, spitting on them, throwing things
Mhm,
at them. We've seen
mhm,
thousands and thousands of videos of this stuff
mhm.
over the past
Frozen water.
5
Have you seen
years
the
in
frozen
particular.
water bottles as a weapon?
Yeah,
I
yep,
mean, it's
yep.
crazy. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because you're a mom now. So what would it take to override those natural instincts? And I think it is the power of ideology.
Mhm.
Like, this is my job. I'm giving this all up, and I'm going to go out there and do what I think is the right thing. During COVID, when the whole thing about the deep state and QAnon was all in the news, I worked on a documentary for Netflix about the power of belief, and we found this woman. I forget her name now, in Texas. She was a married mom of, I think, 2 kids, successful entrepreneur, started her own PR company in Dallas, and just had everything going for her. And then COVID shut everything down. Her business died, nothing to do. She's home, the kids are at school, or whatever they were at. Maybe in Texas the school stayed open, but in any case, she went down the rabbit hole of the QAnon conspiracy
Mhm.
theory and the deep state and all this stuff. And she told us, well, the final result was she left her husband. She said, "That's it. I'm leaving the kid." No. The husband said, "If you don't stop this, I'm taking the kids and divorcing you because you've lost your mind." So she said, "This is more important to me. Say this. This will be the most important thing I ever do. Save
Wow.
my country. More important than raising your kids? Yeah, that's what. Then she came to her senses when the husband said, "I'm taking the kids and leaving." And he's like, okay. Wait a minute, maybe I better rethink this. Right? It's the same kind of thing I think with a lot of these moms that we're seeing on videos. It's not Renee Good's not the only one. There's a bunch of them out there. The
Well,
videos just the last 2 days of the one with the infant in her cradling, screaming at the guy right in front of her. It's like, are you out of your mind?
yeah,
No, you should not get shot. No, of course, we don't have capital punishment for protesters, but
no.
how dumb have you got to be to risk that?
My theory too is that a lot of the reason that this Renee Good character was not as sympathetic as perhaps the people on the left had hoped she would be is because as we learn more and more about this person, which you inevitably
Mhm,
do, you found out she didn't have custody of her two older kids. And everyone in
mhm,
America goes, huh, well,
mhm,
there's something wrong there because everyone in America
mhm,
knows how hard it is for a woman to lose custody of her
mhm,
children. So
mhm,
it felt like there was this thing that happened, and then immediately you find out all this other information, and people start, who knows why that was? Maybe,
mhm.
but
Yeah, we don't
but
know that yet.
immediately we put on our own, biases, which is like, well, you gotta be pretty nuts to lose custody of your 2 kids. So
Mhm,
then
mhm.
it
And
feels
the
like
second husband, the father of the current 6-year-old, is dead,
yeah,
and you're the only caretaker except for your wife, and
and you're doing
and then
this.
and then she also joined that network of anti-ICE activists
Yep,
with they give you whistles, and you have an app on your phone. Here's where
yep,
you should go, and it's not like she was on the sidewalk. Here's the gray area in this particular, thing. She's out in the street.
yep,
Okay, so it's not clear to me. Maybe this is the kind of thing an investigation or a court case would settle. Peaceful on the sidewalk with a placard, protesting, fine. Out in the street, blocking traffic, and
antagonizing.
taunting. And they said, well, she wasn't taunting. She said, come at me, big boy, or have a nice day. So I was just thinking of that scene in Taxi Driver where Robert De Niro is going, he's looking in the mirror. You talking to me? I said,
Yeah.
"You talking to me?" He's not asking. This is the kind of thing guys do to challenge each other. They're not asking a question, right? It's a
Right,
taunt. Come at me,
right.
motherfucker. I'm gonna kick your ass, right?
And
That's
again, you should be able to taunt the law enforcement. This has been established as like a First Amendment
hmm
right that you can
hmm
protest, you should be able to taunt them. But if you have are if y- now here's where I go, okay, everyone's like, well, she was taunting him. Okay, but they asked her to get out of the car. So
hmm
in what world, like I can't imagine law enforcement saying, "Hey, ma'am, get out of the car. Please step out of your car," and doing anything other than getting
hmm
out of my car. Saying, "I'm gonna put my car in park and I'm gonna get out of the car." So if you say, "Get out of the car," and now again, this is something we're gonna find out in an investigation. There's allegedly lots of conflicting information. Someone was telling her
hmm
to move, someone was telling her to get out. Um, but if you have a vehicle and you don't get out of the car and you continue to drive the car, I'm I don't know that it's wrong to assume you're going to use your vehicle as a weapon in that instance either, or that you're resisting arrest. Again,
hmm
doesn't mean you should die, but
Of course,
it does
right.
get this. There is a lot of gray area in here. As my husband was saying, um, because ice is I've had a lot of issues with the like optics of ice, and also just I've been joking that I'm always getting recruitment ads for it on X, and I'm like, this is they're recruiting troll, like internet
hmm
trolls. If you're recruiting on X, you're recruiting a bunch of internet trolls, and also my algorithm thinks I'm like an internet troll and maybe a Nazi, and and I was like, so I don't know how well trained these people are, but it does seem like this guy he was in the military. He had we find out more and more. But there is this like weird gray area where we don't know the truth. And because everybody's jumping on the immediate, like we know this is going to be out of the news cycle in 5 seconds,
hmm
everyone just jumps on whatever I think you call it my side
hmm
truth. My
My
side
side
truth.
bias. Yeah. Yeah.
My side bias.
Yeah. Well, also the analogy I made was the young woman, old woman image, or the rabbit duck illusion. These Psych
Mm,
101 type illusions where it's an ambiguous figure that flips back and forth, and you can only see one or the other, not both at the same time. And I think this is something like that. And your obviously your political position orientation, it tells you what you're looking at. My take on it now at this point on what it was January 13th, we're recording this, is that she didn't intend to run him over. And he probably didn't intend to shoot her until just the last second. Human psychology and emotions are not, they don't always match your professional training. Usually they
mhm.
do. Most of these guys keep their cool. They don't shoot. That's rare enough that this is a huge event. If this happened every day, these things would, cycle through the news cycle pretty rapidly, but it's not, because it's still rare. So I think, in sociology, this is called a forward panic. Remember the Rodney King beating on the side of the road on the 210 freeway in the valley, captured on film. And this was just, they were like a feeding frenzy. These were like just sharks, just like, yeah. And but the lead up to that was that, it was a high speed chase on the
Yeah.
210 freeway that went on and on and on. They finally got him stopped, and he was a big guy, and he was on whatever he was on, that it made him all super strong and hyper, and he was like throwing these cops, and there was like 4 or 5 of them, and he's just like tossing them off, and they're grabbing him, jumping on him, trying to restrain him, and they couldn't do it. And finally, they just kind of lost their minds, and they just started, just
Right.
wailing on him. And that's been studied as one of these forward panics. Like, there's a phase transition between, I'm going to apply the tools we have for restraining somebody with this the chokehold or whatever, that won't kill them or hurt them, but will restrain them. Okay, they're professionally trained to do this, but at some point, if you just snap, it's that's on you for putting yourself in that position. Like, this is what Jocko Willink calls extreme ownership, also just radical responsibility. What were you doing there in the first place? Okay.
Yeah, my husband and I were talking about this because the point I was gonna make about that he was saying is, like, he's actually shocked that it hasn't happened until now, that in
Mm,
this way, and that it actually wasn't more egregious. Like,
mm-hmm,
there have been a lot of instances of ICE doing messed up stuff that even the Wall Street Journal just
mm-hmm,
outlined in great detail,
mm-hmm.
and I for and also, they've been followed around, antagonized, there are all these lists, so
Doxing.
you have this, tension that has it been going on for quite some time now, and it is kind of shocking to me that this hasn't happened until now, and Jaren, my husband, and I were talking about this because we've been watching Vikings, and
Oh yeah.
we were like, the entire history of the world up until not that long ago was so much of this. It's so in our DNA, and I think that is a little bit what you're describing is you go from this kind of civilized, like, this is my training and this is what I'm supposed to do in this situation that's violent, and usually it was just winner takes all, life or death. Who the strongest, most violent person is going to survive in that
Mm-hmm,
situation.
mm-hmm.
And now we've kind of repressed a lot of that or suppressed a lot of it because we're civilized, but man, does it come out
Mm-hmm.
in those moments.
I had Louise Perry on the podcast about her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, right? So she's talking about the dangers of playing some of these sex games in which you ask the guy to choke you. And
Yeah.
this was right when there was that case of the Los Angeles Dodgers pitcher. I forget his name now, but he got charged with choking his girlfriend. And then in his defense, he produced all these texts where she's going, "Oh, I really like it when you choke me. I can't wait to do it again tonight, whatever." But he
Yeah.
went too far. And so Louise's interpretation of this is that's the dangers of letting the beast out.
Yeah.
Yes, you should be able to, as a woman, you should be able to have safe sex with somebody, even risky, dangerous sex. And if you say no, then he should stop. Yeah, in a perfect world, yeah, he should stop. But really, you're going to take your life into your hands and take that kind of risky behavior and hope
Yep.
that he follows the rules of the modern norms. Like, if she says no, you have to stop, no matter when it happens. Yes, that's true. You should be able to do that, but it's pretty risky. My other analogy was, imagine I get pulled over. I get pulled over periodically for speeding, as I'm wont to do, and I'm always super nice, driver's license registration. I compliment him on his Oakley sunglasses, whatever, just so hopefully he'll let me go. But imagine if I rolled down the window and said, what the fuck do you want?
Yeah.
That's it. I'm going to get my ass kicked, or I'm going to be arrested, or if I take off, there's going to be a high speed chase. We know how those always end,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, what are you thinking when you do those sorts of things? Very
Yeah.
risky.
And it starts with, again, a belief that they have been told, is that in the Minneapolis instance, like, ICE is not legitimate. They're not law
Mhm,
enforcement. These people are told lies that are even things like ICE can't deter American citizens, which is
mhm,
not true. They can
mhm,
they're still considered law enforcement. So you have you have a lot of it's funny that we're talking about this too, because there are always these instances, not funny, kind of just appropriate, being that Scott Adams passed away today as we're
I
talking,
know,
and
I know.
he was the guy who really talked a lot about this concept of two Americas, one screen. And there are moments in America where you really feel that, just s- deeply see the division more than others. And this Minneapolis ICE thing was exactly one of those moments where I'm like, I feel like I live in two countries. Like, if you at the same time, if you go over to left wing media, the way it's presented is
Mhm,
completely different than the way it's being presented in right wing media. And both sides of these parties, people, whatever, they believe that that is true.
mhm. Yeah, no, I toggle back and forth between CNN and Fox News just because it's amusing. It's like same
Yeah,
story, completely different. But
same
even on, like,
story.
I used to trust, CBS, NBC, ABC, and NPR or PBS, but I'm not even sure about that anymore. It's like you kind of see the subtle biases that creep in, just the language, the adjectives they use to describe people. Yeah, even Trump, who's probably the most divisive president we've ever had, people have a hard time being rational about it. I have a lot of
Mhm.
my liberal friends are absolutely have Trump derangement syndrome. They just cannot think of he's done anything correct. They won't acknowledge it. It's a moralizing thing rather than a rational calculation. How about, here's 12 things he did. Tell me the ones you thought were okay and the ones you disagree with. And the answer is none. They're all bad. It's like because he did it. It's like, okay,
Right.
nobody's okay. Well, he's Hitler. He's not Hitler. The whole Nazi analog that people use is such a one-off odd event that happened just because the establishment of a fragile democracy after the First World War, then the inflation, and then the depression, and then the Nazis come to power barely. I mean, it was just so contingent, so chancy. Could have easily gone the other way. There's a dozen things that happened that led to Hitler being in power. He himself, like the week before he was named chancellor, was almost suicidal, thinking it's all over. I have no chance. The party's going to go. They hadn't won a majority. They were almost out of money, and then boom, all of a sudden this happens. Could have gone the other way. No Hitler, no Holocaust, no World War II, no atomic weapons, no nuclear arms race. None of that would have happened. But for these few little. So the idea that the United States is just like that is
Yeah.
so absurd. It's like we're nothing like that.
This is interesting to me because as someone who kind of moved, I feel like the left moved away from me, but maybe I moved away from them as well. As someone who's and then was lost in the kind of middle, it's been a journey. But as I often question myself and wonder if I'm lying, I think it actually comes from being an addict. I never underestimate my own ability to lie to myself. So, I'm
That's
always a
funny.
little bit my husband doesn't seem to suffer from quite the same self-doubt that I suffer from, but, you had Judd Apatow at the Golden Globes saying, like, loosely just being interviewed, like, "I know we're in a dictatorship," which the fact
Right,
that he can even say that and not
right.
worry about being arrested immediately after that should be enough evidence that we're not. But for you, do you ever question those things? Or what would be the evidence that, let's for say, for instance, because the meme going around on the left right now is like, oh, all these liberal boomers were right about Trump, and now we need to listen to them.
Hmm.
What would be the evidence for you? How do you get to your truth about something like that?
Well, you can offer some counterfactuals, like how about send all those people to Golden Globes on the red carpet saying that we're in a dictatorship? Send them to Iran and let them say that.
Yeah.
You know, can you see no difference? Or how about go to Moscow and say that? Or North Korea. Where would you rather live?
Mhm.
North Korea or South Korea? And the answer is pretty obvious. So counterfactuals like that help, I think. The emotions run so high. I think people are having a hard time being rational about it. So just as the most you can say is just ask questions, I guess, is what I do when I encounter this.
Yeah.
Just give me some examples. Or has Trump done anything you thought was not dictatorial? Or I have liberal friends that say, we're never going to have another election. I'm like, oh, really? I'll give you, how about $1,000 bet that there is another election in 2026? No, I'm not talking about the midterm in 2028. Okay, I'll bet you $1,000 there is a 2028 presidential election. Okay, I'm not saying there's not going to be an election. What I'm saying is going to be rigged. It's like, okay, so and how are you going to test that, right?
Yeah.
And so on. So, but just by asking questions and just sort of probing like that, usually people back down, or you do the steel manning. Let me get this straight. Are you actually saying there won't be another election? Are you actually saying Trump is just like Hitler and he should be assassinated? Or so usually most people back down. Okay, oh, all right. Okay, I know he's not that bad, but he did this one thing that, okay, he did this one thing. Okay, maybe we can agree on that. I don't like what he did either on tariffs or whatever it is. And you can find some common agreement, and then that opens the door a little bit for them to recognize, okay, maybe it's not all bad. And I don't know. There's something also called the negativity bias, where bad things hurt twice as much as good things feel
Yeah.
good, right? So, like loss aversion, losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good, right? So, to get somebody to make an investment, say in the stock market, the payoff has to be feel twice as good or twice as beneficial as what the loss would hurt your portfolio or whatever. And that's the case for a lot of different things. We have way more words in the English language for negative emotions, for bad things than for good things. Negative memories last longer than good memories. You can think of lots of ways that things could go south tomorrow for your life, but mostly if I say how could things get better, it's like, well, maybe I'll get a little bit, I'll lose a half a pound, or maybe I'll make a little bit. It's always incremental, but the negative could be a collapse, right? A lot of
Yeah.
athletes say they
So
hate
interesting.
they hate losing more than they like winning. Our brains are wired for negative things because that's the world, as you mentioned, that's the world we evolved in, where mostly bad things happen. There's way more ways for things to go wrong than to go well. And so our psychology is tuned to being highly risk averse, especially women, because you have far more ways for bad things to go. You're smaller. In terms of reproductive strategies, you don't have that many options versus men. So you have to be more choosy and risk averse about who you mate with, and so on and so forth. There's lots of research on this in evolutionary psychology. And so I think for the most part, it's easy for people to slide into a a couple of events that happen is a trend, and then a trend is a disaster looming, about to happen, and that's why we see these people out there. In a modern American city where they're as free as they could possibly be compared to anybody in history, and they're screaming like it's all over, our country is gone, and it's like, really? I mean, the fact that you could even stand in the street and say that, it refutes exactly what you're saying.
But there's so many people who believe this, and like you said, they're kind of acting on these beliefs. But I wonder if what I've been really fascinated. I mean, there's a couple of things that I've been really kind of obsessed with lately, and one of them is, has the gift of fear. You say women are risk averse, but from what I'm observing in women in particular, um, is that they don't seem to have any sense of fear connected to getting in the face of men with guns. You know, we were joking about this before
Mhm.
this tragedy happened. We were talking about the protests in Portland, and there were
Mm.
all these people, and they were riding, it was like a naked bicycle,
Oh, yes.
protest against ICE. And I
Right.
was like, like, if is there anything that screams, "I'm the freest person in the world," than riding naked on a bike in front of men
Yes.
with guns and not fearing for your safety at all?
Right.
So there does seem to be, I don't know if it's a false sense of security, and I've seen this a lot with, I wrote a piece about this, about how women have been kind of trained in the past decade in particular to override their own gut instinct with like political correctness. So when there's a
Mhm.
man in the women's room, you're not
Mhm.
going, "Hey, that's a creep and he makes me feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable." If you say that out loud, you're called a bigot by
Mhm.
a certain population, portion of our
Transphobe. You're a
population, or
transphobe.
you're a transphobe, or if you are a woman alone and somebody comes in and they might be a specific race, and you get that spider sense like, "Oh, I'm in danger, I should get the F out of here." But you override it with, "Well, I don't want to seem racist."
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
how is, because social death can be as bad as, in many people's minds, we've seen them canceled, and women in particular are terrified of social death because being ostracized historically as a woman is at, you might as well be dead, and probably will be very shortly after being socially ostracized. So
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
women, it feels like that fear of being socially ostracized is almost overridden actual physical kinetic
Mhm.
danger in the immediate.
Yeah, that's a great example of, so the complexity of human behavior and the exceptions in a way test the rule. I mean, most of the time, most people are not violent, aggressive, evil, dark, with the handful of exceptions of the psychopaths who are also Machiavellian and narcissistic, the so-called dark triad. Even that, I mean, most serial killers are very rare. There's more books and authors about serial killers than there are serial killers. Okay, they're pretty rare, but it can happen, right? Or the Milgram shock experiments. Yes, you can get people to deliver electric shocks 15 volts at a time, from 15 all the way to 450 volts, but it really takes quite a bit of a particular social setting where the diffusion of responsibility goes to the authority. You're at Harvard, you're at Yale University, or you're at we did a replication of this in for Dateline NBC in a studio. So the people thought they were trying out for this reality television program called What a Pain. And so we're going to have you deliver shocks to somebody to see it. It's going to be our reality show, big fun. And most of the people, we had 7 people went through it. The women were less inclined to do it than the men, but most of them went. They did it. They participated, but they weren't comfortable with it. You could tell they were kind of squirming in their seats every time our actor yelled out that he was hurting from the electric shock and so on. Or in the like the Einsatzgruppen, these are the Nazi police forces that followed the German army into Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, and so forth, and killed every last Jew in every village. Okay, it's pretty gruesome. Most of them had a difficult time doing it. They complained. They got shit faced after they did it. They had to line them up in pits and shoot from a distance because they were having a hard time doing it up close. Brains
Mhm.
splattered all over the place. Himmler went to visit one and was sickened by the whole thing. So our natural impulse is, I really don't want to do this, but you can get people to do it, but it takes a lot. Like back to my,
Mhm.
the Tinder swindler, you can get women to hand over 10, 15, $20,000 to some guy, but not easily, right?
Mhm.
Because most of the time, we're disinclined to do that. So I agree with you. Most mothers would not do this, but we're in the grips of a powerful ideology, that has taken hold on the left, especially. And not to say that the right doesn't have their own things, they do, but
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
one in particular, And so you see, and it's not just this Renee Good. I mean, there's videos since then, just in the last couple of days, that have surfaced. Surfaced. They're posting them themselves.
Right.
You know, there was that
Right.
woman, the woman with the newborn in her cradling in her arm, just screaming at this guy, and this other mother is like, I think she was a grandmother or something. She said, "I'm a grandmother, and shoot me. Go ahead, motherfucker, shoot me right here in the face." Like, so they must. I think you must. I think you must be right. They must think I'm not actually going to get shot,
But
or
why would
else.
they think that after Renee
I
Good?
know.
I
I
mean,
don't know. I
you
know.
would think they would now have because then that leads me to go, okay, well, now we're in a death cult. Now this is a death cult because
Mm-hmm.
now you're doing what Hamas is doing, which is saying, well, the
Mm-hmm.
more of us that get shot, the more civilians that die, the worse this is for the administration. And like, you truly you don't care. This is all for the cause, that you're dying for the cause.
Mm-hmm. Death cult is the perfect description. Yeah, that was Douglas Murray's description of these suicidal terrorists. How do you get people to fly planes into building when they don't want to die? Well, you have to override that natural impulse to stay alive with something else. The promise of martyrdom and eternity and 72 virgins and whatever. I mean, just crazy. But
Yeah.
it happens. I mean, most people do not become suicidal terrorists, but some do.
That does, I mean, even it's also, as we talk, there's all this information coming out about the guy who burned the synagogue. I think it was in
Mm,
Louisiana,
mm-hmm.
and it was a young kid, and he had I mean, this kid seemed like he had kind of everything going for him. He had a
Mm-hmm.
baseball scholarship, I believe, and he was a student and was at college, and decided that he needed to burn this,
Mm-hmm.
because it was a synagogue of Satan or whatever the exact
Yes,
words were.
right,
And
right.
this
Or
is it. Sounds a lot like the QAnon mother that you
Mhm,
interviewed, where it's somebody who kind of went down this rabbit hole and then gets captured. And now I agree, this is not the norm, but it does seem like this is happening, uh, left, right, center. What I don't even know that you can track it left, right even anymore
mhm,
because the online ideologies are so complex. This does feel, I mean, look at AI psychosis.
mhm. Yeah, right.
You talk about in your book about how truth is both real and fragile, but
Mhm.
it feels like this is because the human psyche is so fragile. What
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, these things have plagued the human condition forever. It's more noticeable now because we have social media and it's everywhere instantly. And then it becomes more prevalent because, well, back to what you were saying, it kind of feeds back on itself, and you begin to
Mm,
believe it, and then other people believe it, and they see it. It becomes a common knowledge problem. That everybody knows it. Everybody knows that this is the way it is, and then it feeds back, even if most people don't. This is called pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence, where everybody thinks everybody else thinks something is true when in fact it's not. And short of there being open communication where everybody knows something, so like the example of the boy crying, calling out the emperor being naked, he
mhm.
didn't tell anybody anything they didn't already know. Everybody could see he's naked, right? But now that he said it, everybody knows that actually everybody else knows. Steve Pinker has a nice new book on this called "When Everybody Knows That Everybody Knows." Everyone knows that everyone knows, and so the classic research on pluralistic ignorance is college binge drinking. So you interview students individually, and they almost all say, "I don't really like doing it. I feel horrible afterwards, and bad things happen during these parties and so on. So I don't like doing it. But I know everybody else likes to do it. All my friends do it, and I don't want to feel left out." Back to your social, a reinforcement. So they do it until everybody knows that everybody doesn't want to do it, right? And this is why dictatorships don't want people communicating. That's why Iran just shut down the internet and shut down all media, because they don't want people to know that everybody knows that no one likes the regime. So
Right.
regimes have to keep people from knowing that everybody knows that they don't like the regime, right? It's a common knowledge problem. And
Interesting.
Yeah, and the problem is who goes first, to kind of get it out there before you get sent off to the gulag, right? So this is called a game theory. This is called belling the cat. I don't know if you've heard this expression, belling the
Mhm.
cat. So these are, the mice one day get together and decide, it'd be really good if we put a bell around the neck of the cat so that we can hear him coming. And then it's like, yeah, okay, who's going to do it? Because whoever's going to do it's going to get eaten, right? So,
Right.
so you have the problem: who goes first? Who sits down first during the famous Alexander Solzhenitsyn story in the Gulag Archipelago, where Stalin gave a speech and everybody gave him a standing ovation, and everybody was afraid to stop clapping and sit down. It went on for like 14 minutes. And
Wow.
finally, some guy sat down, stopped clapping, sat down, and he was sent off to the gulag.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
like, yeah, that's a public signal. This is what happens if you go against the regime, right? So again, there's nothing like that in America happening. We're not, in Stalin, Russia, or Hitler, Germany. It's just not like that.
It reminds me of those, you hear about these, like, dancing, the people who got literally kill themselves dancing. Do you these
It's
This was back
crazy.
in, they would start dancing and then there would be a kind of mass
Marathon dancing.
psychosis.
Yeah, I think that was
Yeah.
in the 30s. I think it was during the
Yeah.
Depression. Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
stuff's
Mass
crazy.
psychosis. Yeah. Again, it's rare. I mean, it takes special conditions to get people to go to extremes like that, but they do because we're a complex species. Yeah.
I mean, I do wonder too. The reason I've been thinking a lot about this is because we were just covering on Dumpster Fire. The Poly Market sponsored the Golden
Mm,
Globes, and we were like, "Oh, everything is gambling now."
mhm.
I'm obsessed with these prediction markets, and one of the questions I have is because the conspiracy theorists will say, "Well, this is a brilliant way to basically manufacture consent for
Oh, right. Okay.
because." Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. Interesting. So, yeah, these betting markets are a way of producing cons yeah, manufacturing consent because everybody can see that everybody's betting this direction, so more people
Yep.
bet in that direction, and everybody
Yep.
thinks that's the movement, and then it becomes self-fulfilling. Oh, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way because I kinda like the betting markets. They tend to be more accurate for political, like, elections, for example, than the
Mhm.
the so-called experts you see interviewed in the media who, no one ever holds their feet to the fire for their failed predictions.
Mhm.
But the financial markets there, the betting markets, you're gonna lose your money. But I hadn't thought of yeah, what's the downside? Okay. Yeah, I kinda like following Poly Market. It's rather entertaining.
It's so fun. Yeah, I and
How did they
it's
do on predicting the Golden Globe Awards? I didn't
they
even
got
know.
every single one right.
They did? Of course. Right.
So, how do you but here's my and this is what we were saying on Dumpster Fire. So, how did Polymarket, the people, whoever how did they know that Amy Poehler was gonna win best podcast? Not because she's the best podcast, but because it's
Right.
the correct choice for the winner if you know what the elites are going to do.
Yes, that's it. Right. It's a yes, you're betting on what you think everybody else thinks, not what you think. Right? So
Yeah,
yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It's not having more accurate information and detailed information about an event or a person or a thing. It's information about what everybody else thinks about that thing.
but
Yeah.
then wouldn't you be less likely if you are a dude or a woman who's voting on this and you say, "Oh, I know they're gonna pick Amy Poehler because it's the Academy and the elites, and this is the one person they want to win, and she's popular and blah, blah," whatever reason,
Mm.
even though she started podcasting like 5 minutes ago. But then wouldn't you be less likely to go on Reddit and talk shit about Amy Poehler being
Mm.
not even shouldn't even be on that list? It should be Rogan and it should be Tony Hinchcliffe and all these people who have the top 5 podcasts. You'd be less incentivized to do that because you've already put money on the outcome that you know is
Mm.
most likely. So in a way, it also can start to suppress dissenting opinions.
Right.
Like, it's
And the
kinda crazy when you really think about it.
and the numbers are pretty big, right? The number of people on the Poly Market platform is in
Yeah,
the
they're
hundreds of
big.
thousands. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's like millions of dollars bet every
Millions of
day.
dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
so
saw
I
that.
don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
been
I don't know.
thinking it was interesting getting ready for this interview with you about truth and then thinking about, AI and then now going in these deep dives about prediction markets and then, the conspiracy theorists are like, well, Peter Thiel owns this and this is like
Mm,
the CIA can drop their kind of the information that they would normally have to disseminate through journalists or people that they're trying to get things out into the public.
mm.
Now they can just do it through this mechanism.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, spreading disinformation about somebody or something. Yeah, but you'd have to capture a lot of people to get the momentum going in the other direction. Maybe that's doable. I don't know. This is probably new enough that there needs to be more research. There was research back in the day on the wisdom of crowds. There was that book, James Surowiecki's book, The Wisdom of Crowds, with the
Mhm.
popular example of the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you can phone a friend or poll the audience or what was the eliminate two of the four options, something like that. And the poll the audience turned out to be the best one for general, just sort of a general knowledge question, not super specific, but the audience seemed to know pretty well instantly, which is more likely or less likely to be true. So there's something, again, it's the famous example from the 19th century of, how much does the ox weigh? You're at the farmer party thing,
Right.
whatever they call those things, and so everybody guessed the weight, right? And so it turns out that a large enough sample of people guessing the weight. No one has any idea what or how many marbles are in the jar, that kind of thing. Nobody knows. But the extreme values cancel each other out, and you end up with a bell curve. And the one in the middle is most likely to be closest to the accurate actual number, and that turns out to be a good way to do it, because there you're getting you have to have a fairly large sample size where the extreme values cancel each other out, and you end up with something fairly close. That wouldn't work for very very specific things where you have to have specialized knowledge, maybe, I think. Although, isn't much of the stock market like this, and
Yeah,
always has been? I mean,
always.
I have all my assets in the stock market, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I just guess what everybody else is thinking. Like, well, I have Apple and Google, and the Mag Seven, right? Intel, Amazon, Tesla, Google, Apple. Anyway,
Yeah.
because that's what everybody else uses. Everybody uses these products, and I figure, well, everybody else is going to want to invest in that. So I don't even know what their PE ratio earnings are and all that stuff. I don't even pay attention to that. I just think, what is everybody else going to do? I remember when Elon went on Rogan and smoked that joint, and I watched it that same day. I thought, oh, next day the price of Tesla stock is going to go way down. But I just hung on. I didn't try to sell because
You
I,
should
I
have
I was
bought.
going to miss.
You
I
should have
should have
bought
bought.
the
I
dip.
should have bought. Yeah, exactly. Buy the dip. Yeah. So there, it has nothing to do with how valuable a company is Tesla. I mean, Schwab still has Tesla rated as like a D. I mean, it's like the lowest rating you can have, and yet it's like the highest performing stock ever. And so there's no rationality behind it. It's just people betting on what they think other people want.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is why I've always been so fascinated. Isn't there like an actual fear index that they look at with
Mm-hmm.
the stock market?
Mm-hmm.
It's
I guess so. I don't really follow that,
I
but
mean,
yeah.
I've always been fascinated with behavioral economics, and I think this really gets down to like essentially. I mean, think of all the data points they're getting from something like Polymarket or Kalshi, like
Mm-hmm.
the behavior, because now people are putting, the whole theory is people are less likely to lie because they have skin in the game, and I'm like, yeah, but they're
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually agree that that's true. Look at the Amy Poehler example. Maybe they know
Mm.
what's the most likely outcome, and even if they don't believe it, they're still gonna lie with their money because they know there is an incentive for them to lie with their money so that they can win.
Mm. Mm. Why did she win? I didn't really follow any of this. Why did she win? Is she popular? She's the Saturday Night Live woman, right?
Because who know? Because because she's a woman, because she's popular. Who knows? Because
Okay.
But it's funny that, like, why did Polly Market know she was
Mm.
why did we know she was going to win?
Mm.
Why did I, when I looked at those 5 examples of the 5,
Mhm.
options, which they left out all the actual popular podcasts. Why did I know she was
Mm.
gonna win? I don't know that I
Interesting.
could give you,
Yeah.
like, a specific reason for why, but I just
Mhm.
knew. And then
Mhm.
it's just like, thinking about your book, and I've had a lot of conversations with family members. I've known there's kind of an interesting phenomenon occurring with, women in particular who are kind of obsessed with Candace Owens, and these are
Mm.
the women I would say, Michael Malice always says, take one red pill, don't take the whole bottle." That's like his one of his many phrases that sticks out from the past decade, and I always laugh at that, but these are women I think who kind of came through COVID. They took the whole bottle of red pills and now they're down all of these rabbit holes, and Candace has really capitalized on that population in particular of women who are who don't trust anything. So they now
Mhm.
say, "I don't trust the government. I don't trust anything." But the interesting thing to me is that I say, "Okay, so then you trust this Candace person? Like, how do you
Mhm.
determine what you trust? Why do you
Mhm.
trust her?" Well, she doesn't trust anything either, but this is just an Ouroboros of people who don't trust anything.
Mhm.
How do you
Interesting.
how do you I wouldn't even know where to begin how
Yeah.
to
Well, okay, so I just wrote a piece for Quillette on this. They haven't dropped it yet, but on Tucker and Candace and the truth about history. So I have a chapter in my truth book on history. How do we know what's true? What really happened in the past? I mean, it's gone. I wasn't there. You
Yeah.
weren't there. Okay, so how do we agree on this? Okay, well, there's tried and true methods. I go through all those, but in general, this idea you kind of hinted at it. Why are you listening to this one person? So 27 people say X, and this one guy says Y. I'm going with that guy. Okay,
Mhm.
I've seen this happen in quite a few people. I was just on Brett Weinstein's podcast, and he famously, is kind of a contrarian on these things in science. And again, it's like we got talking about he went on Rogan and told Joe, not exactly told him, but suggested that maybe 17 million people died from the mRNA vaccine. All right, I saw that. I knew, okay, I'm going to go on Brett's podcast. I'm going to ask him about this because people are going to give me a hard time if I don't. Right. So I didn't Google it. I put it in Gemini and Grok. I know Gemini is Google, so that's more maybe liberal bias, and Grok is Elon, so that's more maybe centrist or right, just to make sure. And they both said exactly the same thing. The 17 million figure comes from this one flawed study by this guy. That's who Brett cited. And here's how he got the 17 million, and here's why everybody thinks that's inaccurate. And here's like the 27 other studies that show pretty much that almost nobody, there's a few, but it's nothing like millions. And so my question for Brett was, how come you're going with the one guy? And how come
Mhm.
it seems like you always go with the one guy and not the consensus? And it came out he just doesn't trust the consensus because he got burned early in his career by peer-reviewed consensus in journals or what. He has a long story about this having to do with some of his early research, and he just lost trust in the system. It's like,
Okay.
okay, well, all right, but what's the alternative? Well, Brett's alternatives. I'm going to go on Joe Rogan and tell him my theories. Well, but that's not a peer. I mean, Joe doesn't know anything about these subjects and he can ask questions. He's a good conversationalist. But are you hoping other scientists are watching Joe Rogan and they're going to go, oh, I hadn't thought of this theory of evolution that Brett Weinstein has? No, they're not. That's not where they get their knowledge about their particular specialty. So, although there are problems. I discuss this in the book. There are issues with the peer-reviewed system, the replication crisis that started in
Mhm.
2010 that showed
Mhm.
maybe half of all psych experiments, the famous ones, probably should have never been published. They're not replicable. Like Amy Cuddy's power pose. If women learn to stand up with their shoulders back and their head up, and this will increase their testosterone, and they go in there and get the raise, and the power pose, right? Well,
Yeah.
she gave a TED talk. It's like one of the most watched TED talks ever, and women are walking around strutting with their shoulders. And it turns out it was never replicable. Nobody could replicate it. And there's,
Uh-huh.
dozens like the famous studies, like if you interview people at the top of an escalator versus the bottom of the escalator, how much money they'd like to donate, they give more at the top of the escalator. Like, what? Or if you have a clean desk, physical desk, or your laptop desk, you're more likely to be generous in your donations than if you have a dirty desk. Or if you hold a warm cup of coffee and then you meet somebody, you assess them as being warm. I mean, it's just
Wasn't the marshmallow test one not even is that
that
one?
that that one actually was replicated,
Okay.
but the criticism though of it was that originally this was Walter Michel's research when he was a professor at Stanford University, and his subjects were children of other professors. So this isn't exactly a random sampling of kids from across America, right? It has
Right.
since been more or less replicated, as has Milgram's experiments, the shock experiments. Uh,
What
some of them
about
you can't.
the
The
prison
prison
one?
experiment, yeah, that's never been exactly replicated because you couldn't get it through an ethics committee now.
Mm,
Uh, I think there's some value in it because he did randomly assign subjects by the flip of a coin, whether they be a guard or a prisoner. But the criticism of is that he kind of coached the guards on how to be badass guards. Like
right.
he got this idea from that movie Cool Hand Luke with
Yeah.
Paul Newman with the mirrored
Mhm.
sunglasses. Where that the guard is, and I think what we have here is a failure to communicate, and bam,
Mhm.
right. So a badass guy with the mirrored sunglasses. So he had him doing that. Later, some of them said, "Yeah, I didn't really want to, rough these guys up, but yeah, you know, Zimbardo told us to do it, or kind of showed us this is what you should do." So I kind of went along. Yeah, but they didn't say that until decades later. Before that, they were going, "Oh yeah, I got so into it." So that one I'm not sure about. It'll never be replicated anyway for ethical reasons. But yeah, there's a lot of those. Like if you hold a pen in your mouth this way versus
Mhm.
this way forces my lips up into a smile, so I'm more likely to find your joke funny. Okay,
Uh-huh.
this is bullshit. This is never replicated. This was not replicated. There's a bunch like that,
So
and
yeah, there is a lot of reason that people have not to trust the truth that comes out
right,
of a lot of these
right.
places. So what if you could do the problem with your book is amazing, but it's very philosophy heavy and what is, truth and not truth and known knows and no what how do we simplify if you were going to make a TikTok about this, how do you tell people to assess because I understand that I contrarian instinct,
Hmm.
certainly, where just the consensus is, that it's that meme, like, you're all wrong. Because sometimes one person, like you said earlier, the emperor has no clothes. There is one person who's brave enough to stand up and say, this is all
Hmm.
bullshit.
Hmm.
But how
Yeah,
in
I
our
know.
time
Yeah,
do
how do
we
we know?
how do we
I know.
balance this?
Yeah. Well, that's, back to where we started as, I think you just have to sample a lot of different ones. You hate that phrase, do your own research, but yeah, you should do your own research. And now the LLMs, I think, are useful. Again, try Grok and Gemini both just in case. So far, I've tested this, maybe on a dozen times, and they came up pretty close. So maybe they're not biased. But of course, they're just sampling what's already out there, which itself may be biased. So yes, maybe Brett Weinstein is the Galileo or the Darwin of his time. Um, but in fact, for every Galileo or Darwin, was a bunch of other people in those times who had alternative theories to the mainstream, and we don't know who they are because they were wrong. Most people with alternative theories of physics, Brett's brother Eric has one, and he has the same problem. He doesn't trust peer review and so on, so he goes on Rogan, and people offer to publish. Why don't you publish it in a journal? I don't trust the journals and something. Okay, there's good reasons, why you should be skeptical of these. But what's the alternative? So the
Yeah.
alternative is to clean up the system, right? So now, for example, you to avoid the file drawer problem, which is where you only report the successful experiments and you just file drawer, just put them away, the ones that didn't turn out. Now you have to pre-publish. You post online on these sites. Here are the experiments I'm going to run. All of them. Here's exact conditions, and I'm going to report everything that happened. And then, of course, I'll submit to the journal the best interesting results. But here's a raw database. Here's everything, right? So that avoids the file drawer problem. There's the p hacking problem where you try to get a p value of 0.01 or 0.05, and that so there's ways to kind of get around that problem. So there's
What's a p-value?
The probability of your finding being due to chance.
Okay.
And so you want it to be, less, 0.01 would be, 99% chance that it's not due to chance, probability that's not due to chance. Let's say I have what would be an example of this? I'm testing a psychic on whether they can determine if a deck of cards is red or black. I'm just flipping them one at a time. You have to tell me red or black, just psychically, right? How many would they need to get right before I'd say, yeah, this person has psychic ability? Well, you could say, well, half. Well, no, they're going to get half by chance, right? And so it has to be better than half. How much better than half? So, if you had 50 and you said 25, okay, but how much more than 20? They're going to get 25 by chance, or maybe they get 26, 27, or 24, 23. Turns out you need to get about 35 out of the 50 for it to be statistically significant above chance. Now, they could get it that way by accident, but very, very unlikely. So then we would say,
Right.
well, there's something else going on. Now, unfortunately, in that particular example, I've seen people like the Amazing Randy get 100% because it's a magic trick. They do a
Right.
magic trick, right? So you have to avoid that problem, by the way. But that's the idea that most of the corrections in science have come from within science itself. That is, it has a self-correcting element to it. Another example I use from Naomi Oreskes' book, Why Science, in which she showed that, for example, when science was done all by men, there was a famous study in the early 1900s by a Harvard biologist showing women really should never go to college, and because they just don't have the cognitive power, because during menstruation, all the blood is away from the brain and they cannot think higher thoughts. I mean, and he published this in like peer-reviewed scientific journals, right? I mean, it's just batshit crazy now. But the moment that, women started getting hired and started teaching and doing research and so on, it's like all that stuff, went away because it was bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. So Naomi's point is that, we need a diversity, not just race diversity or whatever, but, viewpoint diversity. Different people with different perspectives are in the room together in a committee or doing the research in the lab or whatever. And that's the kind of a self-correcting process, that this is the problem of working in isolation. I have my alternative theory of physics and I'm not going to tell anybody about it. And I'm just working alone in my lab. That's a bad idea because you're likely to be wrong and no one's going to be there to tell you you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm reasonably confident that the system works pretty well. Most of the errors in the history of science were uncovered by scientists, not by outsiders. Even Einstein, he was working in a patent. He was a patent clerk. Yeah, but he already had a PhD in physics from, the most, working with the biggest names in physics, and he's a super smart guy. This is not just some rando that's out there that just happened upon the theory of relativity.
What belief of yours has changed the most over your lifetime?
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, probably religion. I was raised religious, but I was became a born again Christian when I was in high school at age 17, and I went to Pepperdine University, which is a Church of Christ school, and I took it pretty seriously. I took courses in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the life of Jesus, the writings of C.S. Lewis. I've read everything C.S. Lewis has written, and and I really got into it, and then I just lost my faith. I went to graduate school at a secular university, and no one was religious, or maybe they were. No one cared, and also the problem of evil I thought was troubling, and I started studying, like sociology of religion and psychology of religion, social psychology, anthropology. So it was clear there's thousands of different religions. What are the chances I got the right one, and
Mm-hmm.
all these other poor schloobs are wrong? And I know they think they're right, or even just take the big three. The Muslims, they think the Christians are going to hell. They picked the wrong guy. Jesus was not the Messiah. Even Jews don't believe Jesus was the Messiah, and they believe in the same God in the same book, at least the Old Testament. Right. So I kind of
Yeah.
put all that together as, I'm just going to stop. My girlfriend at the time was in a a bad car accident and was paralyzed for life. And the problem of evil really bothered me on that one. It wasn't a test of God's existence. If you heal my sweetheart, then I'll believe in God. It wasn't like that, but it was just so crushing emotionally. And I thought, this is a sweet, wonderful woman. If there's a God, why would he let this happen? And
Mhm.
then, once you go down that, why the Holocaust and, those kind of things, not why earthquakes happen or whatever. Those are
Yeah.
natural things, but why
Child
would you,
cancer.
why would you allow child leukemia? I mean, this is
Yeah.
horrible. You're a mom.
Mhm.
It's not just your kids. So you suffer. You would, if your kid, that you'd suffer for the rest of your life. Oh, it's a test of your moral character. It's like, thanks a lot, God.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I kind of gave all that up and became a fairly enthusiastic atheist until recently. So in this book, I'm trying something out new here. The chapter's on religion. Instead of like all the other new atheists of kind of going on the attack, this is all bullshit, right? It's a
Mhm.
myth, as in not true. So I've kind of rethought some of this, that if we think of religious texts as literature instead of bullshit, fake stories, false mythological stories that aren't true, they gain some more insight. So I make a distinction between scientific truths and, say, literary truths. So my analogy is, were there really four brothers Karamazov in Dostoevsky's great novel about 19th century Russia? No, of course not. It's a story, right? Is there really a Middle Earth in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings? What are you talking about? He made it up.
Mhm.
It's a story about something else, deeper truths, great literature, Jane Austen and so on. These Jane Austen novels are great. Great literature is great because it touches on truths about the human condition, love and jealousy and power and deception and, hierarchies and conflict and violence and all that. That's what makes great literature great. So instead of thinking of biblical stories in a scientific way, did it literally happen? Okay, you're missing the point of the story. Did Jonah really spend 3 days in the belly of a great fish or whale? Okay, stop asking those kind of questions. Those are the wrong questions. So I've been trying this out. So Bridget, I'm not sure how this is going to go when the book gets read, but I've been trying out even the resurrection. Maybe Jesus was not literally risen from the dead. He was dead. He probably existed. He was probably crucified. Romans crucified everybody for trivial crimes. Okay, so that's probably happened. And so he's dead for 3 days and he's brought back to life. Did that happen? I think this is the wrong question. I think the evidence is good. Probably it didn't happen. But in any case, the larger point of the story is, redemption, starting over,
Mhm.
being born again, forgiveness. We're going to overthrow our oppressors. The Christians at the time, barely Christians, were, oppressed by the Romans. And the Old Testament said that a Messiah is coming and he's going to redeem us from our oppression. And Jesus of Nazareth was not the kind of person that the Old Testament prophet said would be the Messiah. He was just a nobody who was tortured and killed, and
Mhm.
his whole trial lasted like 5 minutes. It was nothing. And so that's the wrong way to think about it. I think it's a call it what you will. I'll call it mythological truth, or sort of a Joseph Campbell, Jordan Peterson kind of, this is what there's no dragons really, but the dragon in mythology stands for something that's true in the human condition. So I've been trying that out, and the Christians that I try it on, they're not buying it. They're saying, no, no, Jesus had to be literally risen from the dead, or there's no point in my being a Christian. And I'm like,
Mm.
why does it have to be literally true? Anyway, that's kind of where
Interesting.
I'm waiting to see how this kind of unfolds.
Yeah, that's something was thinking a lot about with the book is, are there moral truths or just moral arguments?
Hmm. Well, there's arguments, of course, but do they represent something deeper? I'm arguing for moral realism, that there really is a right and wrong, and a good and evil, and the baseline is human flourishing. That is to say, the survival and flourishing of sentient beings. That's us, and other conscious creatures, I guess, like cetaceans and great apes and so on. But to stick with humans, and I start with Lincoln, as I would not be a slave, I would not be a slave owner.
Mhm.
And it's what Pinker calls the principle of interchangeable perspectives. And this really begins with the Enlightenment idea of, well, it's actually an old, the golden rule. How would you feel if somebody did this to you? So all religions have discovered this principle, and then the Enlightenment thinkers and philosophers kind of articulated it into a rational argument. And so most of moral progress, well, you had me on for the moral arc book, comes from
Yep.
this idea of like, well, how would I feel if, I was treated this way? It's Rawls's, just society is, when we make up the rules, you don't get to know which group you're going to be in. You're male or female or black or white or poor or rich or tall or short or whatever. We want to make society so just that it doesn't matter which group you're in. You're going to get a fair shot. Something like that. That's Spinoza's viewpoint from eternity. That's Locke's and Rousseau's idea of a democratic society where the people have a say. Everything we value in Western civilization is based on this idea that there is an actual right and wrong. That's why I mentioned that example of where would you rather live, South Korea or North Korea?
Yeah.
Everybody says South Korea. Okay, why? It's obvious why. Would you
Yeah.
rather be starving, or would you rather have enough food? Would you rather, be free or slave? Would you rather be ignorant or educated? And so just go down the list. Would you rather be healthy or diseased? North Koreans are like 4 inches shorter than South Koreans on average.
Crazy.
Just height alone from the nutrition differences.
Mhm.
Of course, everybody says, yes, of course, I'd rather live South Korea, or I'd rather live in West Germany than East Germany before the reunification. Why? Well, it's obvious why.
Yep.
Everybody knows why. Okay, how do you know? Because we have I claim we have an intuitive moral sense of right and wrong that we evolved, of what we desire for our own selves. So bodily autonomy. I choose what I can do with my body, and so on. Of course, there's natural restrictions on this. I can't drive on the left side of the road in a country like ours, something like that. But we give up some of those freedoms politically to actually have other kinds of freedoms where I can drive safely on the right side of the road, not worrying that some nut going to be on the wrong side, right?
Right.
So even there, I think, so what I'm arguing in the book is that there is real moral right and wrong, and we can know what it is, and we do that through what you said, argumentation. We debate it, and that's why the ultimate right of all is free speech, because that's the only way to figure out what everybody else is thinking, and then let's hear your best arguments.
Yeah. It's such challenging times right now. It just feels like everyone believes they're right.
Hmm.
And you
Yes,
can
well, so
easily
that's
back that
yeah.
up, by the way.
Yes, everybody can find evidence for their argument. So that's why I start with the principle of fallibilism. Always, this is called, in Bayesian reasoning, this is called Cromwell's rule. Oliver Cromwell famously said, "I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, you might be mistaken." So Cromwell's rule in Bayesian reasoning is you never assign a 0 or a 1, 0% or 100% to anything, because you could be wrong. So, I have my doubts about the existence of a deity, but I know for sure if there is one, it isn't me, and it isn't
Mhm.
you. You're not omniscient. I'm not omniscient. So you and I need to work together to figure out what's true, because if I'm doing it on my own, I could be wrong.
Yes. What's something that you were confidently wrong about?
Well, I would say a lot of my youthful libertarian viewpoints. I was a pretty hardcore Ayn Rand objectivism, almost anarcho-capitalist, just laissez-faire, Hayek and von Mises and all the school of Chicago School of Economics. I was heavily influenced by that. Actually, at Pepperdine, everybody was reading Atlas Shrugged. I'm like, oh my God, look at this book. I don't want to read this thing, And then I finally got into it, and everybody was. So I kind of got early influence. I think that viewpoint doesn't well match human nature, the tendency for humans to cheat if they can, free ride, freeload, cheat the system. We need government. We need some rule of law, I don't want to say I'm getting more conservative in my old age, because I'm not a conservative. I call myself now a classical liberal. But yeah, I would say that. The abortion issue, I've become more sympathetic toward pro-life arguments, even though I'm still pro-choice because of the bodily
Mhm.
autonomy thing. But still, they make some good arguments. Okay, let's acknowledge that this should not be a form of birth control you use, say, in the third trimester. Okay, it's
Mhm.
they're yeah, okay. And gun control, I'm conflicted about, although I've largely given up. I just think we need some gun control, and for all the good reasons that people other than me have articulated. But still, there it just seems hopeless in America with 340 million Americans and 400 and something million guns. I don't think anything's going to prevent school shootings and mass public shootings. I'm just so I don't even comment on it anymore. Another shooting. Oh, how many days has it been since the last one? It's like it's just hopeless.
It's still wild to me though, thinking about this is an area where I think I began whatever how you open this talking about what we say we believe connected to what we actually know. And that was the beginning of me, I guess, realizing how much I didn't know because I was always mouthing off about school shootings and whatnot, and I knew nothing. And I was like, I don't
Hmm.
even know how to load a gun. I don't know if you can how to even get a gun in California at the time. And it began this really big, humbling, constantly humbling realization that I really just don't know anything about most of the stuff that I'm mouthing off on.
That's true
And
for most of us, I think.
but now that I'm seeing these kind of dictatorships rise, and my husband and I, in honor of the 250th birthday of America, we've just been spending more time like rereading the Federalist Papers and the
Hmm.
Constitution and getting back in touch with the
Yeah,
the
I keep I
founding.
keep I keep this right here on my desk,
Oh,
right?
nice.
The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. Oh,
But
the
I was like,
Federalist
how
Papers,
crazy
incredible.
is it that these guys were like, "We're gonna let our population have guns?" It's still the wildest thing.
I
The
know.
more that I think about it, it is still completely wild that you would create a I get why they did it, but as we've grown, you're like, "Yeah, that's wild that that."
Have you ever seen somebody try to load one of these muskets, these breech
Mhm.
loading musket? It's like 2 minutes to get there. Maybe it takes a whole minute or something to fire one bullet, right? Yeah, I don't know. It just seems there's nothing to be done now. I mean, there's not going to be a callback. Okay, we're going to call back all 400 million guns. Never going to happen. You're going to have, if you did, you'd have Waco every weekend. It's
But
just,
this is one of those things where it's I think a lot too about the trade-offs that we make in our society for freedom versus risk. And as we
Mhm.
become a more, guns have become more powerful, et cetera, but also we become a much more safetyism society. And I think about this a lot more, less in the context of guns, but more in the context of what we've traded for our privacy,
Mhm.
another right that we allegedly have that is gone. It's just like
Mhm.
we live in I constantly obsess about the surveillance state that we've just opted into because everybody's got a Ring camera and I
Uh-huh.
mean, last night I went for a jog and every other house, it was like something whistling at me being like, "You are being recorded." It just is like, we don't need the government to surveil us. We're all
Just
surveilling each
surveilling each
other.
other. Yeah, that might be the answer to the surveillance problem. We've lost that battle. The government, we're being surveilled by big tech companies and so on. I had a guest on recently. I was trying to get an answer to this question. If I turn my iPhone off and I have it with me, is it pinging? And apparently so. I mean,
Yeah,
powered off,
it is.
because there's still a battery and it's still pinging. So if I committed a crime, I mean, they could get the data
But it's
apparently,
also
and
how they
so
find women and men, or people who have been murdered, or people who get
right,
lost on
right,
trails and never found. They still can
right,
know where their phone was pinging even after it died.
right. Yes, I know. So, okay, so somebody knows what I'm doing all the time. My first funny example of that, I have a Tesla and I got a flat tire. The only time I got a flat tire. So I'm out in the middle of nowhere. And so you don't get a spare with the Tesla. You just call
Someone
them and
just like a robot just
they
appears.
come out and they give you a tire, right? So I'm on the phone with a guy and he goes, all right, we got somebody going to come out in just a few minutes. I go, well, let me give you the address where I'm at. No, we know where you're
They're
at.
like,
I'm like,
"We know where you
oh,
are." Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, okay. Of
Yep.
course you do. What am I
Yeah.
thinking?"
I'm surprised the robot didn't just show up
Yeah, I
from,
know.
with a tire.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
yeah, it
crazy.
does.
I don't
Now,
know.
but
This
you're
is
in now, Bridget, you're in Texas now, so you're not packing heat?
Oh,
Isn't
no, we
everybody?
are.
Oh, you are?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I became because I pulled on that thread of what I
Oh,
don't
I see.
know, and at the time I was at Playboy, and then I asked my red-blooded American male audience to write me about what we should do about this gun debate, and they wrote me these completely thoughtful thousands of word essays that I didn't expect, and I was like, "I don't really know anything. My argument is entirely emotional. It is 100% emotional,
Mm,
and um and it opened me up to realizing it is amazing that our country lets us do this,
yeah.
allows us to have guns, and um just also that I should know more about these things before I kind of run my
Mhm,
mouth
mhm,
about them. And
mhm,
yeah, I've that's an area where I've really changed my mind, and my
mhm,
original belief about it was not based in really anything other than just my factory settings. I grew up in a pretty anti-gun house. I had anti-gun parents. I had then a lot of bad experiences with mental illness and gun owners later on in life. So then I
mhm.
became even more like, yeah, no one should have a gun, but it's like, well, obviously if you're mentally ill. But then it was then yeah, I've come a long way on that one, and now I think for a woman it's like an amazing way to level the playing field in a situation
Mhm.
where you have no power. Now, a lot of the time the weapon gets used against a woman and there's all these other arguments, but um yeah, I don't think that the government should confiscate everyone's guns.
Yeah, no, that would be a bad idea.
What is your biggest defective character?
Well, for my profession, I'm probably too nice and conciliatory. I should be a little more confrontational. I should be a little bit more like Hitch, just like Hitch slap people. And I have a hard time doing that, but maybe it's just temperament, I guess. Um, I don't know. I guess in my younger days, probably I should have. Well, I don't want to talk about my personal love life. let's just
You
say,
don't have
let's
to.
just say, I was married for 22 years. Now I'm married for 12 years, and probably early on in my 20s, I should not have gotten so involved with women unless I was really committed to it.
Yeah.
But you just sort of stumble along. I remember relationships in college and graduate school and so on, it's sort of the male female difference in psychology. I'm just like, well, we're just having fun and it's great. And then I'm just going to move on to, do something else, or I'm just bored or whatever. Not really thinking, that much about it. But in some cases, somebody's really hurt by that. If
Mhm.
I had it to do over again, I'd say I would be more cautious or prudent about that sort of thing. But we know a lot more about male, female sexual psychology, where women get more attached than men do. Men can have more. It's not that women can't have one night stands or whatever they do, but just on average, men can
Yeah.
have more promiscuous sex without commitment. The hookup culture in college apparently works better for men than women. Louise Perry writes about
Yep.
this in her book. This has
Mhm.
not been good for women. It's good for men, like hee hee.
Yeah.
So I would say something like that.
It's good for
And
men short term, but I would argue it's probably not good for men long term either.
no, it's not. I just had the guy who head of the Kinsey Institute. He has a new book out. You should have him on your show.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
love to.
oh yeah, it's
I would love
what's
to have the God one on
the
too. The
intimacy. I'll send you all this when we get off the air.
Okay.
I'll send you all this stuff. But yeah, he was saying that new research shows that sex is better with intimacy than without, and not just for women, but for men also.
Oh,
And
yeah.
more men are reporting, yeah, the sex is way better when I actually love the woman. Yes, so you
Shocker.
can have a fun hookup, and yeah, okay, but it's much better with somebody you really know and that you really love. And like, oh
Mhm.
wow, okay, that's good. That's encouraging.
And what's your biggest asset?
Oh, probably that I'm not as smart as a lot of the people I deal with. I can tell, that certain people are smarter than me, but I'm pretty widely read, and I have a diverse range of interests, such that when I talk to people, I can talk to people about almost anything because I've read a book on it. I like to read and listen to podcasts, listen to audiobooks, listen to teaching company courses and so on. I just can't get enough. So I would say the diversity of topics that I enjoy, and that I actually like doing it. Same thing with exercise is no problem for me because I really like doing it.
Yeah.
People complain, "Oh, I have to go to the gym and work out 45 minutes. I'm going to kill myself." It's like, and I get that because like when I go and I'm traveling, I go to the hotel gym. It's like, oh god, it's sitting on this stationary bike staring at the wall. I hate it, but but for me, I like to ride my bike for hours a day, or play tennis, or just work out with my friends, and So, but I'm lucky that I just enjoy the physical, just moving my muscles in the sun and the air and sweat and all that stuff. So I would say intellectually, physically, those are the two.
That's great. And where can we find you?
Well, skeptic.com is the webpage for the magazine, michaelshermer.com for, my books, and all 214 of my Scientific American columns are posted there. So they're not
Wow.
dead. They're still alive.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And where can we find you, online personally or on X or
Oh,
wherever you hang out these
I
days?
really just do X. I really like X, just at Michael Shermer,
Okay.
Shermer. Yeah. I don't do, I mean, Instagram, TikTok. I know I should do all those things. I just don't. I don't know. I can't do
No,
everything.
you need to get in beefs with people. That's the only way to get ahead these days, Michael. You gotta beef. You gotta beef with someone.
Beef. Okay. I don't even know. How
I
can I
don't
not know
know.
that?
That's what everyone always tells me. They're like, "You need to beef with people." I'm like, "I'm not beefing with people." It's just no.
Well, it is uncomfortable, back to the drawbacks. It is uncomfortable for me to disagree with people. I have to kind of force myself to do it. If it's a
Yeah.
public debate and it's clear, here's the arguments, that's just an intellectual process for me. It's like a sporting event. I'm trying to win.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody I like and we're talking, I really have to kind of like, I just need to push back a little bit on this, instead of saying, Jane, you ignorant slut. Remember from the
Yeah,
old Saturday Night Live thing?
exactly.
It's just not my style.
Yeah. Well, you'd probably be famous if it was.
I don't know. Yeah,
Uh,
the hitch slap videos are so entertaining, but I just not my style.
yeah, I get it. I get it. I get it. Well,
Well,
thank you so much.
you have humor, that helps
Yeah,
too.
it does. It
If you
does. And
if you're
I'm not
funny,
I'm not
you get
I'm
away
not
with it.
I'm a kid of divorce. I'm like a Gen X kid of divorce. I mean, that was me being kind of like the politically homeless center. Like, I want everyone to get along. Stop fighting, please, mom and dad. It's just like in my
Oh,
nature to
that's
try
interesting
and
'cause, my parents were divorced when I was 5, so I was raised in 2 homes.
yeah,
And, yeah, there was
exactly.
always stuff going on, and I was just, like,
Always.
just having to be
And you see,
conciliatory.
like, 2 sides to the you see the 2
Yeah,
truths. When you're a
yeah.
kid, you're like, "Alright, well, this when I go here, this is true. When I go here, this is true." And then you get good at adapting to, like, both truths, and I
How old
tried
were
it.
you when your parents
They were,
divorced?
like, 12 when they
Mm,
separated and 13 when it was final, so
mm. This is
yeah, but it
another
was
question I
always like
have. This is another question I have that I don't know if social scientists can answer. Is it better to stay together for the sake of the kids if you have a bad marriage? But I guess how bad? Not abusive. You're just not getting along, but you just stay together. Or is it better to divorce and start over and the kid has two loving families? And
they've actually done a lot of long-term studies on this, and because I went down these rabbit holes after I wrote just a very simple piece about how divorce never ends, and it went, like, crazily viral, and everyone was
mm,
mad, and a lot of people were like, "You put to words that what I felt," and, they say basically if you're not in an abusive family, like, if the parents aren't yelling at each other, if they're kind of in this peaceful cohabitation where there may be not in love or they don't want to be
Mhm.
together anymore, that if they stay together for the kids have better outcomes than
Interesting.
if they'd gotten off. I mean, I don't know how you tell. The outcomes for kids who are divorced are just bad
Yeah.
because you've got the Cinderella effect and you've got bouncing around and more likely to do drugs, more likely to fail out of school, more likely to not go to college. This is like true for kids of divorce, all whether people want
Interesting.
to believe it or not.
Right.
And there are families who get divorced and they manage to do it well, and the kids experience love and they don't get abused by the stepdad or whatever. But that's actually, I think, pretty rare. Usually it's
Interesting.
like they have, people on both sides, stepmom, stepdad, step whatevers. But there was some study I was looking at where it is better for the kids if you stay together than if you were to get divorced, unless, of course, there's
Yep. Yep.
abuse. Like a lot
Yep.
of people who came at me for that piece are like, I left my husband because he was an alcoholic. It's like, I didn't say not to leave your alcoholic husband.
Right.
Like,
Right.
every so much of the internet is just projection. It is like
Yes.
100%. It's
Well,
just people being like, "Well, my dad was abusive and kicked my mom's ass." Like, I didn't. I very clearly in this piece say,
yeah.
other than instances of abuse, but so that's when it's
Interesting.
actually better. But
Mhm.
I think generally, yeah, it is better to stay together for the kids.
Probably if nothing else, just pragmatically, financially. I
Yeah.
mean, just, one household rather than
Yep. Yep.
1 rent instead of 2. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, my
Yeah.
parents so I had probably the best you could have. Both my parents remarried. Both my step parents were loving and supportive, and I have step siblings. I have half siblings, and it's all pretty good. But even that, later, in my 20s and 30s, I still remember thinking, I just kind of wish my mom and dad had stayed together. I mean, why?
Yeah.
What's the problem here? You know, and then
Yeah.
when I was going through, my first marriage, it was kind of rocky, and I thought, I'm just gonna, you know what? I'm not gonna put my kid through this. I'm just not gonna do it. I didn't like it, and I had the best possible worlds you could have, 2 homes, and still, I don't know. It's just not the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. But then we do these things and like again, who am I to judge? People can do whatever they need to do for
Yeah,
themselves.
that's
I'm
right.
very
Yeah.
much like live and let live. The kids, the argument I was always pushing back against was just this idea of like the kids are resilient, they'll bounce back. But both my husband and we like my husband and I are both perfect examples of kids who are straight A students doing pretty well went off the rails when their parents got divorced.
Mm.
So
Oh, your husband's parents were divorced too?
oh, yeah, which is
Oh,
why
mm,
when we had a kid, I was
mm.
like, "Oh my god, this shit never ends." I didn't realize what my siblings have been going through, like, with the multiple households and all the grandparents
Mhm.
kinda fighting to get a piece of the kid, and it's just like, "Oh, man, I didn't know. I didn't know."
And do you think you and your husband are helicopter parents? Coddling? I know
On
I am.
some I mean, in some ways, like, we try very hard not to be, but I think in some ways she's an only child, so it's very hard. Just by
Mm,
the fact that she's an only child alone makes
mhm,
her more coddled than if she was.
mhm.
I'm one of 5. So, I'm the oldest of 5. So we were,
Mm,
it's funny, there's, like my mom has this me holding pictures of me with a child with every one of my siblings, and the first one I'm, like, smiling, and the second one I'm smiling, but you can see it's not as much of a smile. And by the end, the 5th child down, I'm just, like, scowling at the camera.
mm.
So, you see
That's too
how
funny.
every introduction
Yes.
I'm like, "I know what this is. I know what this means."
Oh my
But
god, that's too
she has
funny.
our undivided attention. So, by
Mhm.
that but, yeah, I mean, I always wonder if we're yeah, it's like I never know what to do with, toddlers are tough, like,
Mhm.
they're just and then they're not toddlers anymore, and
Then they're not
then
done I know. Yeah, my little guy's 9 now, gonna be 10
oh,
in May. I know,
wow.
it's going so fast.
Yeah. So,
And my
I don't
daughter's
know.
34, so I've been through it
Wow.
twice. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for
All
coming
right,
on. I'm
Bridget.
excited about your new
Yeah,
book.
that was great. Thank you so much for having me.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome.
It's the dumbest line.